Every so often, a man comes along who is able to inspire those around him through his own bravery and courage. Nothing brings these kind of men to light more than war. And in today's video, we're going to be covering but one of these men, and the man who I deem to be one of the, if not the bravest Anzac soldier of World War II, Bruce Kingsbury. Bruce Kingsbury was an Australian man born in Melbourne on the 8th of January 1918 who grew up in the Melbourne suburb of Prahran. Not much is known of his early life, but it is known he first met his lifelong friend Alan Avery when he was 5 years old and would often race billy carts with his friend up and down the hilly streets of their home suburb. Later in life, Kingsbury would take up work at his father's real estate business despite deeply disliking the job. Due to this, he would eventually quit and took up the position of caretaker on a farm near where his friend Avery worked. After 3 months of working there, however, he and his friend decided to go on an adventure walking through Western Victoria and New South Wales. The two friends eventually ended up in Sydney, where they would catch a train back to Melbourne. Upon their return, Kingsbury resumed working as a real estate agent with his father, whilst Avery worked as a nurseryman. Over the next few years, the pair spent their free time dancing and partying like many young men of the day. It was during this time where Bruce met Layla, who would soon become his girlfriend. Around this same time, the war in Europe was escalating, and seeing the destruction befalling the rest of the world, Bruce Kingsbury and his best friend Alan Avery made up their minds to enlist in the war, which, despite his parents' disapproval, Kingsbury did on the 29th of May 1940. Kingsbury was originally assigned to the 2nd Pioneer Battalion, but requested a transfer to the 214th Infantry Battalion to join Avery, who had coincidentally enlisted the same day as him at a different recruitment centre. The pair undertook basic training at Puckapunyal in central Victoria. Soon after their training ended, they learned that their section were to be sent overseas. It is at this point Kingsbury informed his friend that he planned to propose to Layla. Although Kingsbury managed to give Layla a wristwatch as an engagement present, they were unable to arrange a marriage license before Kingsbury had to leave, and the marriage never took place. Kingsbury, along with his good friend and the rest of the 7th Division, were shipped to the Middle East in late 1940, where on the 9th of April 1941 they were sent forward to Mersa Matruh in Egypt to support the Commonwealth Forces defences, where they replaced the Scottish unit and took up positions in the garrison. On the 23rd of May, Kingsbury's brigade was sent back to Palestine en route to battle in Syria and Lebanon. When they arrived in Lebanon, they were soon engaged in battle with the Vichy French in the Lebanese mountain ranges. For the next few months, Kingsbury and Avery would fight in many towns, including a major battle in Jezin, where Avery was wounded by a grenade which drove shrapnel into his spine. Avery was subsequently awarded the military medal for his cool courage and devotion. Kingsbury and his battalion would stay in Beirut, Lebanon, for a few months until setting up a semi-permanent camp outside Jerusalem. After a few months of calm outside Jerusalem, Kingsbury's battalion sailed back home via Bombay, now known as Mumbai, on the 30th of January 1942, as the division was needed to fight against the Japanese in Papua New Guinea. Kingsbury's battalion arrived in Adelaide on the 16th of March, before continuing on to Melbourne by train. After some additional training, the battalion moved north to Brisbane before boarding a ship destined for Port Moresby to join the fighting in New Guinea. After the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Japanese abandoned their attempt to capture Port Moresby from the sea and subsequently landed ground forces at Buna in north-east Papua on the 21st of July 1942. After capturing the town of Kokoda for the second time on the 9th of August, the Japanese began advancing along the Kokoda track towards Port Moresby. The 2,500-strong Japanese force met the 39th and the 53rd Infantry Battalions at the town of Isarava. As the battle developed, members of Kingsbury's battalion, including himself and Avery, arrived at Isarava to reinforce the exhausted 39th Battalion. Following this reinforcement, the two combined battalions began digging in around Isarava. During this fortification, a headquarters had been set up at the top of a hill, which was vital to the defence of the position. Unfortunately for those brave Anzacs, while they had been digging themselves in, the Japanese, led by Major General Tomitaro Hori, were preparing to attack. Fatefully, on the 28th of August, the Japanese launched their offensive on the Australian positions. The Australians, who had initially been outnumbered, were roughly equal in strength by the time of the attack and managed to heroically resist the attack in the face of heavy machine gun fire and hand-to-hand combat. Unfortunately, the following day, on the 29th of August, the Japanese broke through the right flank and began pushing the Australians back with heavy fire. As the Japanese came dangerously close to cutting off the Australian headquarters, the Anzacs began to prepare a dangerous counter-offensive filled with volunteers, two of which are the subject of this video, Bruce Kingsbury and Alan Avery. As the counter-attack ensued, Kingsbury and Avery bravely ran down the track with the group under heavy fire. Using a Bren gun he had taken from the wounded Corporal Lindsay Bear, Kingsbury, alongside Avery and the rest of the group, engaged the nearby Japanese. The fire was so heavy that the undergrowth was completely destroyed in 5 minutes. Lieutenant Colonel Phil Roden later recalled of Kingsbury's actions that you could see his Bren gun held out and his big bottom swaying as he went with the momentum he was getting up. Followed by Alan Avery. They were cheerful. They were going out on a picnic almost. It was then that Kingsbury, firing from the hip, charged straight at the Japanese with his best friend Avery in tow. Avery later recalled of his friend's actions that he came forward with his Bren and he just mowed them down. He was an inspiration to everybody else around him. There were clumps of Japs here and there and he just mowed them down. Unsurprisingly, his actions demoralized the Japanese, killing several and forcing others to find cover. The rest of the Australian group, inspired by Kingsbury's actions, then forced the Japanese further back into the jungle. It was at this time, as the Japanese were retreating, that Kingsbury was mortally wounded by a sniper who fired one shot before disappearing. Avery, who had been about 6 feet or 1.8 meters away from him, briefly chased after the sniper before returning to carry Kingsbury to the regimental aid post. But unfortunately, despite Avery's efforts, Kingsbury was dead by the time he arrived at the aid post. Kingsbury's actions proved to be a turning point in the battle and likely saved the lives of countless Australians, despite the end result of the battle being an Australian defeat. Kingsbury's actions did not go unnoticed as he was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross, as well as having a suburb of Melbourne named after him. His body now rests in the Bomana Cemetery, Port Moresby, and his Victoria Cross is on display at the Australian War Memorial, Canberra. That's going to be it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed learning about this incredible story as much as I did. If you've made it this far, you're an absolute legend, and I really appreciate all your support. But yeah, with all that being said, I hope you guys have a great day, night, wherever you are, and I hope to see you lovely people in the next one.